In this episode, the featured film takes the viewer into the world of dreamers, shines a light on the messy, nasty, financial corporate world of New York City, and makes us believe maybe the little people can change a nation. These stories and more from the 22nd row. Working Girl was released in 1988. This film is a romantic comedy, a drama, and a bit of a fantasy. The time is contemporary, so 1988, and the location is New York City primarily, and though not explicitly stated, Wall Street, the world of Wall Street, the corporate world. The film introduces the viewer into that magic decade of the 80s, a decade with which I am very familiar. I became an adult in the 80s. I graduated from university in 1980, so that was my first decade into the adult world. And so I have a fondness for many things of the 80s, not everything, but many things. And Working Girl definitely shines a light on many aspects of the 1980s. Big hair, fashion faux pas like shoulder pads, the corporate world, which I think has never really changed, but certainly takes a close look at this particular corporate world, and ultimately music. I almost forgot how much I love this film. Almost, but not quite. And I love this film for a number of reasons. First of all, I very much have an affinity for the 80s. It was my first decade, as I said. I very much love the music of this period. The music was incredible with acts like Michael Jackson, Lionel Richie, Phil Collins, Whitney Houston, Madonna, amongst many, many others, including Carly Simon. For me, the 80s was about sports. To be young, to be fit, and to be athletic, to be 25 years old, that's not a bad combination. So in the 80s, I played a lot of hockey, I played a lot of softball, and this was very, very satisfying. I also watched a lot of movies. I watched almost everything that came out into theaters, and I also played catch-up watching films that that had been released many years before, 10, 15, 20, 30 years before, but I had the time to watch them. So that part of my 80s was terrific. But I also entered the working world, and I must say that I'm not a huge fan of the working world, and I'm very glad that I am no longer part of that working world. And the working world, as described in Working Girl, is very similar to my own experiences in that corporate world, which is another reason why I have so much affection for this film. But the 80s was, as I said, a decade of very unique fashion for women, more so than for men. Big hair, and there's lots of big hair in Working Girl. And music, terrific music. I can never say I've had big hair. And the only time I wore shoulder pads was when I played hockey. I don't know how the current modern day viewer would look at the 80s, but I certainly look at it on them with affection, with fond memories of a lot of good things. There's a song from the 60s that kind of describes my world in the 80s, and it's called a 5 o'clock world, which means my world really began after 5 o'clock, after work was over, and all the joy I had from my pursuits after 5 o'clock. But we all have to make a living, and so I had to work for a living, and it was not, I would say, a very happy experience. Throughout the 80s, I had jobs I didn't particularly like. I moved around from job to job, and I certainly spent my time in the corporate world. And I must say that I have no fond memories of that experience. I met many wonderful people along that journey, but for the most part, I found that the corporate world that I knew was very similar to the corporate world depicted in Working Girl. Hierarchies, elites, little people, walls to advancement, cynicism, racism, the list goes on and on. I obviously don't think very highly of the corporate world. As I said, I met so many wonderful people in that world, but I also saw things that I just couldn't understand or couldn't understand, and I didn't like much. It was amazing that I worked in a financial institution, and there, in the particular department I was in, there were 4 vice presidents. They were male, they were white, and each one of them was 6'4". Almost like there was a rule somewhere that if you weren't 6'4", don't bother aspiring to be a VP. I can't say that the corporate world is a level playing field. And Working Girl looks at all of these elements. The corporate world there is male-dominated. All the senior people are very Anglo, which is another way for saying very white, have very white names. And the little people are they just look different. Of course, they don't have as much money, they don't dress as well. I found it very fascinating that in Working Girl, the big hair people are all the so-called little people. These are the secretarial pool or the junior, not even management, but even if they're higher than the secretarial pool, they just look different than middle and senior management when there are women. And there were a few women, and of course in Working Girl there is a main character who is female. But Working Girl is not about that, even though it depicts all of these elements. So allowing for the fact that I'm not a big fan of the corporate world, I really like this movie because it wasn't preachy. It didn't hit you over the head like a hammer with this is bad and what a horrible place this is and aren't people awful. It is a story about romance. It is a story about dreamers. It is a story about trying to make your life better. And so with all the movies I like that do have a very important message, that do touch on themes that I think are very relevant, the main focus of the story is something else. So we can be entertained while at the same time we can think about what exactly is going on. Gee, the main players all dress so well that they look like they could come off the screen. Today, they don't have the big hair that was very popular at the time, and I don't have any problem with the big hairstyles. I thought they were fun. And if you get a chance to look at music videos from the 80s, there's a lot of big hair, but there's also a tremendous amount of musical talent. And maybe over the top of the jewelry or how these little people, so-called little people, dressed. And our main character does talk about the little people. There's another expression for those people called invisibles. And I'll just reference quickly a movie I liked very much called Me Before You, starring Emilia Clarke, who is of Game of Thrones fame. And she makes reference in that movie to a very rich man who she gets involved with for lots of reasons, that he never would have looked at her because she was invisible. He had to look at her because she was sort of a physiotherapist, but not quite. But she was helping out this fellow because he had had an accident. But otherwise, he never would have noticed her because she was one of the invisibles. And I think that's very true. Servers at receptions, the secretarial pool, the entry-level person who is not in the immediate stream to advance. So the little people are the invisibles and are not even noticed by the upper elements of the corporate world, this elite who have achieved these positions, in some cases absolutely through talent, but in just as many cases through pedigree, through connections, and once they get there, they are very determined not to let anybody else reach their level. At least that's how I see it, and it definitely comes across in Working Girl. So our story isn't preachy. It isn't about all the evils of Wall Street, and even though there are many evils on Wall Street, it's about a female who tries to do better. She is the hero of the movie, and everything revolves around her in Working Girl. She wants to do better. She's taking night courses. She has an entry-level position, but she's trying to get into the next level. She's trying to get into programs that will allow her to become part of the next tier of worker in these financial institutions, where she has much more authority, an ability to really express herself with her know-how, and she's meeting resistance at every level. And the movie opens where we see her on the way to work with her best friend, and it is a spectacular opening. And I'll talk about the music later, but the music in this film is another reason why I love watching this movie, if only just to close my eyes and hear the soundtrack, not only the song, the theme song of the film, but how the instrumental elements of the soundtrack use the same theme throughout. I just think it's wonderful. She arrives at a typical office, I assume on Wall Street, a huge body of desks, and she's involved in a trading element, and we see that she is clever, driven, but also there's a line she won't cross, and she works with men who constantly challenge her, not for her talents, but for the fact that she's an attractive woman. And there's no question that our hero is very attractive. The first place we find her is this very challenging male-female world where the men are doing all the work and the females are very much supporting them. And something happens and there's a bounce, but this opening scene tells us a great deal about our main character and also something about the culture that we're going to watch for the next 2 hours. She gets a second chance, and we learn again how she's had more than a couple of chances and that she has butted heads more than a few times because there's just some things she won't do as being one of these little people, while at the same time she's aspiring for so much more. So finally we see her in the office of which most of the movie is going to take place, and oddly enough, she is going to be working for a woman. So the setup is excellent. Well, this is very different. Our hero is excited about this. She's not working for one of these men who are misogynistic to some extent, or at least see women as tools rather than as colleagues, and everything looks rosy. She sees this woman as a mentor, and the movie sets us up, say, oh, this is going to be great. Now she's got a chance. All her dreams are going to come true, or at least they're going to start to come true, and isn't this great? But of course, the movie is much better than that, and something else happens very early on that once again brings into play the notion of what the corporate world can be like. The world of pettiness, the world of betrayal, the world where there is no trust whatsoever, where people steal ideas and make sure that someone who might be smarter than them or more ambitious falls by the wayside. So now we're set up with some serious conflict in the workplace. We also have our hero involved in some conflict with her boyfriend. And so that is another thing I like about the movie, and that, this is what really happens in the workplace. You meet people, you get together, there's romance, maybe even marriage. But what happens when you have a dreamer who is with someone who is a little bit of a dreamer, but not quite, who sees women the same way these corporate people see them, as not colleagues or equals, but as add-ons? And so we now see that she has some problems in her personal life. She's got problems in her professional life or her working life. Everything seems to be going in the wrong direction. And once again, the story does a terrific job by setting up the next part of the film where something happens to her boss. And that allows the movie to really explode. And somehow our hero figures out a way to advance herself by taking advantage of the fact that her boss is temporarily out of the picture. And this is where the movie really takes flight. This is where we really see our hero spread her wings and do some incredible things, which are, of course, entertaining and fun, and drives us right through the entire movie. Our hero's name is Tess McGill. Her boss's name is Katherine Parker. She hooks up with a fellow by the name of Jack Trainer. And so you see that there's not a lot of diversity in this world. There may be diversity in the secretarial pool. We don't see too much of that, but there is some. But certainly the people who are the movers and shakers are all white and mostly men. In fact, there is a reception early on once Tess joins the company with her boss, Katherine Parker, and that reception is 99% male. So this is the world that Tess is traveling in. This is the world that many of us who have been in the corporate world know that it is still Today, I don't know. I've been out of the corporate world for a while, but certainly for 30 years from when I started in the 1980s, it's a man's world. And the dominant positions, the overwhelming majority of senior people in all of these institutions were men. Tess finds a way to hook up with a man from another firm, this fellow Jack Trainer, because she has an idea. And this idea is part of the financial world that she is traveling in. And the viewer, I don't think, doesn't need to know too much about finances to understand what's going on. Mergers and acquisitions and other things that people do when they are working in financial institutions. The movie does a nice job to sort of explain what's happening. And so she meets up with Jack, and to some extent sparks fly, and then the movie, as I say, goes into another gear and is just terrific, if not from the very first scenes of the film, certainly from the point where Tess has an opportunity to spread her wings to go right through to the end of the film. So that's why I like this story so much. It's clever, it's heartwarming and heartbreaking at the same time. Tess has a good friend who adds an enormous amount of comic relief, but she's very typical of the secretarial class. Big hair, exaggerated makeup, maybe, though some people might say it wasn't exaggerated. It was very typical for the times and perfectly acceptable. I have no problem with that at all. Even though the story exists inside this framework of a hierarchical, betray-ridden, nasty kind of world, it's still uplifting because we're focusing on Tess, our dreamer, our hero, and we want her to succeed. We want her to reach her goals, and we like what she's doing, and we don't like all the bad things that happen to her. So once again, a story that is really easy to get into, and the male leads are a combination of nasty, mean, perhaps not as smart as Tess, but ultimately she finds somebody who is a nice guy. And that's why I sometimes say that this movie is also a bit of a fantasy, because Tess is very, very lucky that she meets a nice guy in this world. And of course, because it's a romantic comedy as well as a drama, she has to meet a nice guy. It wouldn't be a fun movie if all she met were the nasty people she's met from the beginning of the film. And so that brings us to the casting of this picture. First of all, the release date, as I said, was 1988. And the billing of the film is, take it or leave it, who cares? There are reasons, more powerful agents get their clients to be billed higher up than others. Studios get involved and say, no, we don't want that name first, we want this name first, all that stuff, who cares? At the time, it probably meant something. And I did, in fact, see Working Girl when it was released in the theaters, which, again, as I say, is the only real way to watch a movie, but we watch how we can watch. First billing in this film was Jack Trainor's role, and that was Harrison Ford. Now, it's very hard to argue with that being the lead billing, even though the hero of the film and even though the person that makes the film work is Tess McGill. Now, Harrison Ford was an absolute superstar by 1988. He had already done Star Wars. He had already done the Indiana Jones pictures. He had done one of my favorite films called Blade Runner. Terrific, terrific film. And so he was on top of the world, and he would stay on top of the world for at least 10 years after this film, maybe even longer. But he was still young, 30-something, very handsome, and was a proven star. And he is excellent as Jack Trainer. He fills the role of a nice guy, but who also swims in this corporate world and knows about the pitfalls, and has a very good speech about what it's like to work in that world, which as we're watching the movie and watching the chemistry between Tess and Jack, we sit up and say, hey, that really makes a whole lot of sense, or those are really important points about the kind of world they live in. But at the same time, we put that aside for a bit because we're more interested first in the story and also the relationship between Tess and Jack. So Harrison Ford, great choice, top billing, leading man, and a superstar. The next billing, which again I think is interesting just to take a look at that, is the woman who plays Katherine Parker, the snobby, elitist, in love with herself, senior manager at the firm that Tess works in. Her name is Katherine Parker, and she often refers to the fact that the reason why she deserves all the things she deserves is because she's Katherine Parker. And that role was played by Sigourney Weaver. Now, I don't know if audiences today remember Sigourney Weaver. She also had a fabulous career, and by 1988, she also had an incredible track record. She had done the Alien movies. She'd done two Alien movies, Alien and Aliens, which did make her a star. She had been in Ghostbusters, which was a phenomenally successful movie that everybody saw, and so she also was a superstar. And up until this film, I kind of liked Sigourney Weaver, but after this film, I could never watch her again with the same appreciation, because she was just so good at this nasty, miserable person that after this film, I just could, no matter what role I saw her in, I could just never look at her the same way again. So good for her, not so good for me, I guess, as a viewer. And then finally, third billing, incredibly, is our hero, our star, and that was Tess McGill, who was played by Melanie Griffith. Now, Melanie Griffith was known to audiences by this time. She had been in a couple of films very young, but I think that she wasn't a big enough star to have gotten top billing for this movie, but this movie definitely made her a superstar. And there's just something about Melanie Griffith that just works in this film on so many levels. She's incredibly attractive, but not like, I think, the women of today. And I don't want to go too far into this and suggest that, well, she isn't, she's voluptuous, she's gorgeous. She starts out the film with a huge head of hair and with the makeup typical of other secretaries. She changes things over the course of the film for reasons that the story explains. We are absolutely on her side right from the beginning. She's smart, she's not mean, she's not hurtful, but there's a line she won't cross, and so it's very important that we like her, and we do. She has to be attractive enough so that the people, the upper echelons in this corporate world, even Katherine Parker and Jack Traynor and other senior people, look twice at her. She isn't an invisible. Even though she's a little people, she's not as invisible as others, and very quickly, for lots of reasons in the story, she becomes drop-dead gorgeous, attractive, upper management person, and everybody notices her. So she works on so many levels in this film. We want her to succeed. She's nice to look at. She has this very soft voice. Melanie Griffith had a very distinct whisper of her voice. She doesn't like being yelled at, which I like a lot, because I always liked it when people would say, "Don't yell at me." And they're not yelling back. They're just asking them to, if they have a disagreement with them, to converse without screaming. And I always found that a very positive trait. And I love how more than once in this film she says that. So she is the center of this movie, and she is spectacular. The chemistry between her and Harrison Ford, Tess McGill and Jack Traynor is unmistakable. The chemistry between her and the owner of a company that gets involved in the story is also unmistakable. She just lights up the screen from start to finish. And I think you cannot say enough about her performance, how, of course, she was attractive. All leading women and leading men are handsome and attractive, but she really brought something extra to this role, and does it, and I think really makes the film work and takes it to another level. There's a couple other people in this film that are worth talking about. Her best friend is an actress named Joan Cusack. She was the sister of a very popular actor in the 80s and 90s named Joan Cusack, and she did almost exclusively comedic roles in her career. She's funny, she's got a very well-written role, and she does it and she plays it to the hilt. Not too much, not too little, but her timing is perfect, and it just works. And we really need her in this film because she is the shoulder for Tess to cry on when necessary, also to use her as a sounding board for some of the things she's going through and the problems she's having. And so Joan Cusack is a welcome addition to this film. Tess's boyfriend at the beginning of the film is an incredibly recognizable face, and that is Alec Baldwin, who went on to have a 30-year career after this film. He had done some movies before this, but he had not yet done The Hunt for Red October, which was to come out a couple of years later, the film which made him a star. But he is a very attractive man, a perfectly acceptable boyfriend for Tess because she's very attractive, but he's a little rough in this film, and again, it works terrifically. There are others, of course, and as I always say, when the movie works, the supporting actors and the lesser actors in the film do a terrific job, and there's many of those people in this film to make it work. But the film focuses on Tess McGill, Melanie Griffith, Katherine Parker, Sigourney Weaver, and Jack Trainer, Harrison Ford, with a couple others thrown in. But these are the main elements in this film, and as I say, I believe they do a terrific job, as always, in all the movies I like as much as Working Girl. The next element in this film that I think makes it so much better than you can imagine is the music. And when we say music, I say the theme song to this film, which is Let the River Run, written and sung by Carly Simon. It explodes off the screen at the very first scene with Carly Simon's magnificent voice. And I don't know if people today know who Carly Simon was. She was very active and very successful in the 80s when there were superstars like Whitney Houston and Madonna, amongst many others. But I loved Carly Simon. I loved her music. And in this film, it is the perfect marriage of a song and a story. And so the opening sequence, that song, Let the River Run, starts and explodes off the as I say, explodes off the screen, and it is just wonderful. It sucks us into the film right away. It's such an enjoyable song. The Let the River Run, let the dreamers wake the nation, and the lyrics are terrific. There's a chorus, there's like a whole number of people singing the verses at times. And the theme of the song is used throughout the film in the instrumental formats again and again. And that's why I say I can watch this film, close my eyes, and just listen to that music. It is wonderful. Carly Simon had a terrific career. She had many wonderful songs. She was very much a fan favorite. She had a wonderful, wonderful voice. And I think, once again, Let the River Run and Carly Simon's vocals elevate this film. So there are a lot of themes in this movie, as I've mentioned. The betrayals of the corporate world, the lack of trust, the pettiness, the greed of the corporate world, the way I think it makes people behavior more beastly than human in many ways because of the need to get more and more money. But again, it's downplayed because the story is about a romance and about following Tess and her dreams, not a documentary on the evils of Wall Street. That being said, they're there, and we do, as we follow Tess, we see that she is a victim to these things. She is a victim to betrayal. She is a victim of, if you want to call it, glass ceilings, or at least gatekeepers who only allow certain people to rise in the system. And those people generally have to be someone who is a yes person or who has the necessary pedigree to be allowed to go into the next level of management. And so we see that this isn't a very pleasant world, but the movie does such a great job of saying, yes, all these things are here, and we want to talk about these things because we really want to depict the corporate world of 1988, but at the same time, we're telling a story. We're telling a very charming story, a budding romance between Tess McGill and Jack Trainer. So that's one of the reasons why I like this film, because it doesn't shy away from the harsh realities of the corporate world. the fact that it is male-dominated, the fact that it is white male-dominated. Even to this day, I'd have to say, perhaps less so than in the 80s, but I think corporate worlds, ever since the end of the Second World War, were probably very much the same. Certainly had a lot fewer women until the 1970s at least. There's another element to this film that I love, and I've seen it 3 or 4 times in all the movie watching or television watching, and that is when the movie is aware that the people who are on screen are special. And by that I mean almost all the actors and actresses that are in movies and television are camera friendly. Even the bad guys are nice to look at. Maybe not the Elephant Man, but on the whole, they're nice to look at. And so there are scenes in this film that acknowledge the fact that, you know what, Harrison Ford is a really, really, really handsome fellow. And before I mention that scene, I'll talk about the other scenes in other places where I've seen this. And 2 of them are television shows. One of them was called JAG. I think it was in the 90s. It was about lawyers in the military. And a very fun show. It ran for several years. But there was a female officer in this show, and her real name is Catherine Bell, and she was extremely attractive. And they've manufactured a story once where she had to sort of go undercover for just a few minutes in one episode only. And it was around a guy who had a yacht or something. And so she appeared on screen in a bikini, and she was just jaw-dropping. And her colleague, who was another lawyer, a male lawyer, junior lawyer, he acknowledges the fact that she looked gorgeous. Now, many times in films, people just ignore that. They just, they just act as if, oh yeah, those women are around, or men, all the time. But they went out of their way to acknowledge the fact that she really looked gorgeous. The next one I think of is a TV show called House. Again, ran for, I don't know, 8 seasons or something. I liked it very much. Hugh Laurie was the star. But I believe in beginning of season 3 or maybe season 4, I don't remember exactly, there was a female in the previous season who had gotten into a romantic encounter with one of the main doctors. And in the off season, for some reason, she really gained a lot of notoriety. Her name was Olivia Wilde, and she was voted in this off season between series the most beautiful woman in the world. Well, the storyline in this series begins the next season where the doctor and her have broken up, and House, who is Hugh Laurie's character House, who is a very acerbic doctor, said, "What are you so upset about? It's not like she's the most beautiful woman in the world." So I just like the fact that they acknowledged that this actress playing a leading role, not the lead, but a leading role in this television series, was incredibly beautiful. Someone, if you saw her on the street, no matter how she was dressed, you'd look at her not twice, but maybe a dozen times. And the last time I saw this that I really liked was, I think, in Thunderball, with Sean Connery as James Bond. And of course, Sean Connery was Mr. Scotland when he was very young. He was very attractive. I mean, he was a superstar from 1963 for the next 30 years. And really, anybody who saw him in person would look twice. So the scene, I think, in Thunderball is he's arriving in Jamaica, and he's at a hotel, and he signs in, and the woman behind the desk says, "Yes, room," and the stairs is right over there. And he walks away, and she doesn't go back down to her work or look at her typewriter or keyboard, whatever she had at the time, or starts filling out paperwork. She stares at him, and the camera in Thunderball stays on her for about 5 seconds, because any woman at that time would be staring at Sean Connery, because he was movie star handsome, as somebody once described. He was the ultimate movie star handsome in the 60s, of course. And I think I like that element of realism in a film, where people just shrug off the fact that everybody in this picture is really good looking or charismatic or whatever, and you don't really think twice about it. Of course you do. So in Working Girl, there's a fair amount of skin, and I think it's very balanced. We see a lot of Melanie Griffith. She's a very attractive woman. I think a very different body type perhaps than what we might see today, but that's all right. She was a very attractive woman, and there's more than a few scenes where we see a lot of Melanie. But Harrison Ford was a leading man, was maybe in the late 80s the most famous actor in the world. And there's a scene where he has worked all night. He's in his office. The office has blinds, but the blinds are open. And he takes off his shirt to replace it with a shirt from the laundry, from the dry cleaners, because it's folded up and all that. And he puts on another shirt. And the people outside his office are looking through his windows, and they see him doing this, and they respond, as of course they would, because this is a really, really handsome guy. And I just like the fact that movies occasionally, which I occasionally acknowledge, that these are really attractive, charismatic men and women that we're watching on the screen. So I just like these scenes, and Working Girl has such a scene, and it's just another reason why I like this film. Working Girl is about dreamers. A wonderful topic for any film. Tess McGill is a dreamer. We want her dreams to succeed. We really care about her. We follow her through her ups and downs. The movie is heartwarming and heartbreaking at the same time, which is not easy to pull off. And because I think the movers and shakers of this film do pull it off. The film was directed by a fellow named Mike Nichols, who had an excellent reputation as a director. It's what makes the film, I think, absolutely worth watching. But at the same time, of course, Working Girl is a fantasy. And this is me speaking from having been in the corporate world and not having too many happy endings in that world. But of course, Working Girl as a romantic comedy has to have, at least in this case, a happy ending. She is very lucky to meet Jack Traynor. She is very lucky to meet the owner of a company who might otherwise brush her off, because company owners are often unapproachable. They're so well protected or shielded from the average person they would never meet. She's very lucky to meet Katherine Parker, who becomes the foil, who I think, because of what happens between them, it makes her even more determined to succeed. She easily could not have met Jack Traynor. She met in the film already many people who were not very nice. But she meets a nice guy in the corporate world. Well, I know there are nice people in the corporate world. I've met many, but there aren't a lot of them. So for our story to work, it has to be a bit of a fantasy. She has to meet the right people at the right time. The things that go on in the movie that allow her to explore her dreams have to happen at just the right time. And of course, it all does, which is fine. It's okay to have a fantasy that's surrounded by all the realism of this rather ugly Wall Street world. But Tess is a dreamer. Tess McGill is like Eliza Doolittle. They're looking at the stars. I thought of Oscar Wilde's quotation that I referenced when we watched My Fair Lady, when he says, "We are all in the gutter, but some of us are looking at the stars." Well, in the corporate world, not everybody's in the gutter. The little people probably, but certainly not the elites. But for our movie, Working Girl, Tess is one of the little people, and she is looking at the stars and dreams of a much better life. Let's hear it for the dreamers. Let's look at the stars from the 22nd row.